All right, this is Chairman Mike McCoo of the Town of Wellington Board of Finance calling to order the special budget meeting of March 10th, 2022 at 7:05 p.m. All right, Kelsey, do you have co-host capability?
I do not yet.
I thought I did that, but let me go back and check. Well, that's going to be better. Okay. All right. First order of business, seating of alternates. Jeffrey is not attending tonight. He's out of state and he asked me to have Jim seated for him. So I'll entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. Kelsey, are you ready to call votes?
Yes.
All right, let her rip.
Christina,
Yes.
Pete,
Yes.
Stephanie,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes. All right, motion passes. Jim, welcome aboard. All right. I just want to, before we get to present to speak, I just want to point out a name you're seeing on the screen there, Samantha Sperry. Samantha was an applicant for the board recording secretary position. Pete Tanaka and I interviewed her and decided to select her and name forward. So I did send an email to the Board of Selectmen, since they actual appointing authority, asking that they appoint her. So she is joining us to start figuring it out tonight. So that's sort of a introduction. And all right, we're on to present to speak. Public participation is desired and encouraged. Speakers will be limited to time and appropriateness of comments to maintain progress, stay on topic, and maintain decorum. So do we have anybody out here who would like to speak and present to speak? I think we know the drill. Turn on your camera or unmute, call out your name. All right. We'll move on to old business, ARPA process. Christina, do you want to start with this as our representative to the ARPA Commission?
Sure. So there was a meeting on Monday, the 7th. That was our last meeting. And at that meeting, we formally received all of the submissions that have been made online so far. And I believe there were 16 that had come in from the previous meeting. Some of those were actually ones that were already approved through the town meeting process back in the summer. But we wanted to have them all in our system. So to give them all a proper tracking number and to have a way to just watch each project through all the different steps, including closing out the project at the end. So we basically have a system now for that. We have submissions. We formally heard some of those submissions, and then we made a plan to go to public hearing with those submissions with, I believe there's 6 of them. And then from there, we're hoping the commission will be able to approve or not approve or change the amount or whatever, make some action based on the public input. And I guess the vision is that as time goes on and we are able to move some of these projects through the system, we'll probably have a few different public hearings, after we have a couple of different projects in the docket. So the plan that we left with on Monday was that we would have like a special meeting this coming Monday that would have public input. But since then, we, on the advice of the town attorney, he suggested that we just do a proper public hearing for those. So the plan is to do that on the 21st at 6:30 p.m. And then following that meeting, we're going to try to have ARPA commission meeting, and if any emergent action needs to happen and the board is so inclined, then we will approve or appropriate for those projects. So so that's where we're at. And there were a couple of projects that that the board felt should come to the Board of Finance, at least just for some input, because they seem to have the potential to create a recurring expense, or that they're a new program. So I don't think, Mike, you didn't list those out on the agenda specifically, did you? Or
it's overall ARPA process.
yeah, okay.
It's the same way it's been on the agenda for the last like 3 meetings.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, first of all, does anybody have any questions about the ARPA process I just talked about and where we're at in general?
Just a question. Good.
Oh,
Go ahead, Steph.
I just wanted, the hearing date is the 21st?
March 21st, which
Okay.
is normally a Monday night that the Board of Selectmen would meet, but Erica was going to try to reschedule that, or yeah.
That's why I was
Because,
asking, thanks.
yeah, because we looked at the calendar and there's just no days that would work for a while. There's a lot of meetings going on. So anything else?
So yeah, a couple of questions. So this, the hearing thing is somewhat of a new development.
Mhm.
And so I'm assuming either you or Erica is going to confirm that we do not yet have the rest of the information back from the town attorney on the questions that were sent out. Is that true?
I don't think so. Erica, have you gotten anything?
I don't, but I'll say the same thing to this board that I said to the ARPA Commission. You know, what we're getting is a document that will make the Board of Finance feel confident in the things I've said, which is we have a legal ordinance that was passed at town meeting that gives the authority to the ARPA Commission. It's going to cost us quite a bit of money, and I would say that it should not stop the ARPA Commission from being able to move forward, because the burden of proof would be on the individual questioning the authority of the ARPA ordinance. So I anticipated that hopefully today. It did not come in, but as Christina spoke about, when I talked to our attorney after our Monday meeting, while we felt that we could do a public hearing in the manner that we had discussed, he thought it was because we were kind of mirroring the Planning and Zoning Commission process for receiving and hearing and then acting upon items, that it was just best to check the box and legally warn a public hearing. And so we decided to do that, which is why there was a change in that date.
Okay. All right, so that will be great to get the information from the attorney so we can put this all to bed. You know, obviously the adding this hearing into the process shows not necessarily there was anything wrong with the previous process, but there's an opportunity to do something extra that will benefit the townspeople and the process. So I think whatever we do that makes it as smooth as possible, you know, that there aren't questions later, is great. And also in the email that I forwarded to the board members this afternoon from our auditing firm, when they provided their prices for the next 2 years, they indicated a price increase partially because the federal government has identified the amount of COVID funds that are now circulating in town governments as a high risk. So I think that's all. So in other words, it leads to more auditing process to address that risk. So I think that just sort of speaks to the fact that it will be great to get the confirmation from the town attorney, which helps us with what would normally be our job to watch over the taxpayers' money. That will help sort of settle all this and make sure that we've done the job to address that high risk by verifying that our process is solid. So those are my thoughts on it. Other board members?
Yeah, I have a quick question, Christina. You had mentioned there are 16 submissions, 16 applications. Only 6 of them are going to the public hearing format.
Yes, at this time. So what we did is we tried to prioritize the ones that had some sort of time sensitivity or urgency to them. And the bulk of them are ones that came forward through the CIP process that were recommended by the CIP committee to be included in the operating budget. So we thought it'd be good to move those through sooner than later because we are about to go into approving the budget. So we wanted to know if those are gonna be okay. And then the others were like the radios for the 2 fire departments and for Public Works. They also added on a request for the same radios. That the price is going to go up on April 1st on those substantially. So that we thought would be an urgent thing to decide on before April 1st.
Okay, I got it. So it's just a matter of prioritizing. These 6 come up first and the others later on.
Yeah, and as it is, like, it's gonna take it, each project takes a while to discuss, and we just, as it was, we had a 2-hour or 2.5-hour meeting on Monday. So we have to limit how many we hear and how many we decide on is basically how it's gonna have to be.
I got it. Just a matter of priorities. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Christina, speaking on priorities, I know one of the areas that this funding is supposed to be valuable for, and one of the reasons we wanted to kind of get this thing moving is the potential that there are people in town who need some sort of support through, I guess would typically be through the Human Services Department or businesses that are suffering. Do we have requests in the pipeline for that kind of stuff?
So right now, yes, for economic development, they put forward a request for small business grants that small businesses and nonprofits would be eligible for. And that's going to be on the public hearing on Monday, that request. And I know Human Services has some ideas, but we haven't seen a formal proposal come through the pipeline yet on that.
Okay. All right. I just was asking a question because of kind of the timeliness thing. If we've got families within our community that are suffering and there's, whatever way we can be as timely as possible. But if there aren't requests, and then I'll assume that isn't an extreme situation right now, or at least we don't need to find a way to act on it because it's not there. It's not required right now.
Correct. Yeah, correct. It hasn't been requested yet.
Okay. And then you talked about some things that would possibly lead to ongoing budgetary impact. And I know we talked a little bit when we sent our previous message from the Board of Finance to ARPA, discouraging approving anything that would lead to followed up expenses down the road, because the public has no way to approve those individually or within a budget package. Then those, what are those that you said? I think you said there were 2.
Yeah, so the first one would be the salary increases in the Human Services Department. And the plan that was presented was put together with Erica and I think in Donna as well, where they worked out a 3-year phase-in plan for this increase or increases to happen. And it would, in year 1 would be 75% of it would be covered through ARPA, year 2, 50% of it would be covered through ARPA, and then year 3, 25%. So it steps down so that it wouldn't be a big hit to the taxpayers in year 1. But it does set up, because it sets up a system where, where the town will need to do that going forward. It felt like something that the Board of Finance should weigh in on, just so that we know for sure that we should be doing that. And and just my personal concern with it is that we can't, the Board of Finance can't even say like that next year, we're going to approve that increase. We can only go 1 year at a time. So it's hard for, if ARPA commits to it for 3 years, but Board of Finance can only commit for 1 year. I'm just not sure the mechanics of that, but that's why we're bringing it back to Board of Finance. And then the other one was the request for a second ambulance for Wellington Fire Department 1.
Okay, so I want to go back to, oh, sorry, do you mind if I go back to the?
Yeah,
the
no,
Human Services?
sure.
So I had to leave the ARPA meeting early. I was listening to it and I was able to hear Erica's presentation on the salary thing that you just talked about. And I guess there are a couple sort of procedural questions first. Some of our grants, and I know there's a very lengthy guidance document for ARPA. But I thought at least at one point we were of a mind that ARPA could not pay for salaries. And so maybe that's not the case.
Well, so I've read through the premium pay section of the documents that we have, and it doesn't say you can't. And it actually encourages some sort of payment for things that are specifically COVID related, like
Sure, bonuses and premium pays and stuff.
Yeah, it really like spells that out. But also we probably wouldn't be using the premium pay qualification for this. And correct me if I'm wrong, Erica. So,
Right, no, I agree. So premium pay is not the direction that I would recommend with this request. We can use revenue loss category. And so with those funds, they can be used for any typical government expense. So anything that your municipality would typically budget for on an annual basis. So these items fall into that. So we could take using a ratio calculation, loss ratio calculation, or a standard deduction up to 10 million. We didn't get 10 million, so we could use that for our whole 1.7 million, and then use dollars within that for anything we would typically spend. So this is something that when was first presented to Board of Selectmen, and then when Jenny made her presentation to the Board of Finance, she included the entire salary piece in her request to the Board of Finance. So what the Board of Selectmen did was reduce that request on our end and split it between the two, the budget and the ARPA process. But my recommendation would be to use the revenue loss category for this particular spending.
Okay, so Erica, I guess what you're saying is that the thought process was Jenny had already submitted that as a full request in the normal budget process, and you're using ARPA to dull the effect of it a little bit.
That is correct.
Okay, all right.
And so to Christina's concern, which I absolutely have, and I think is valid, we couldn't say, right, the Board of Finance, this board, and you know, the board that's in place over the next 2 years of this request could make adjustments within the grant they give to Human Services. So the adjustment could be made in other areas of her department to find the funding for the additional cost, or it's possible that department could go back to ARPA for the remainder if the budget wasn't able to sustain it. And then after the 3-year period, we would have to take a look at whether or not it was something the town could sustain. Right. So that is the risk with adding positions, which is why I don't have a plan to add any other new positions in place from the town's perspective, because there is a lot of risk involved. You have ARPA money to cover them for X number of years, and then you don't know if they're sustainable. And so you'd have to then reconfigure. But this is a department that I feel is heavily affected by COVID, the increase in clientele. And so this is one that, you know, I would argue would be in the best interest of this, and really trying to lessen that burden in the first year, this year. And that's why we made the recommendation to split it 75-25 ARPA budget.
Okay. And then so the money is going to two things. It's going to a raise of either rate or amount of hours for one employee, and it's adding an employee also, right?
It's increasing the hours. So there is an assistant. So we'd really be kind of morphing the human services assistant, which is 8 hours a week now, to a 30-hour-a-week position, and include the new senior center coordinator responsibility onto that position.
Okay,
So someone really to oversee things happening at the senior center.
okay. And then just, you had said that the budget request that we now have in the latest version of the selectmen's packet has the reduction in it to match, to line up with what you are intending ARPA to insert.
That is correct. So the Board of Selectmen reduced the request from Jenny's original request to us and what
Okay.
you heard. So when you
Okay.
heard it, the Board of Selectmen wasn't quite done with their budget. So that's kind of the, there's often can be an issue there.
Okay, right. All right, so anyone else on the board have questions on this topic before we go to the other one that Christina was just gonna talk about? I want to stay on this one if anyone else has a question.
I have a couple of questions. I was wondering if, we're talking about the increase in clientele, i.e. people in need during COVID. But there's not a plan in front of ARPA yet for dealing with individuals and their needs in this time. And I'm just wondering is there something, is there something in the system in the Human Services Department now that addresses people who come forward and say, I need help with X because, my funds are low during the pandemic, or it's, pandemic related, or is there anything like that that's happening now?
So I can tell you now, Jenny makes them aware of services now. There isn't ARPA money to provide, but we're working on what could potentially be something to present to ARPA that meets those needs. And so it may not look like a grant to individual families. It may look like different ways to lessen the burden on other things, but we are thinking about things.
May I speak to that for a second?
Sure.
Go ahead, Jenny.
I'd just like to say that thank you for your interest in that. Basically, what's going on right now is my budget has the town fund, it has the fuel bank, and a lot of those lines I can use to assist families in need as of now. There are also many programs throughout the state, energy assistance and things like that, that I've been helping the families in need apply for. That way, if we don't need to use town funds to help our residents, that's what I've been working on. Does that answer the question?
That helps. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Jenny. Any other board questions on this topic?
I'm not sure I understand I thought maybe Erica I just missed a little bit of what you were saying about the revenue loss category, how this works under that, both of the components of this proposal, how they work under this.
Sure. So revenue loss, really, if you think of it as your traditional governmental spending. So if we take dollars as revenue loss, any normal expenditure in our process. So right now, anything that we would typically have in our budget, we could spend on. So it gives you a lot more flexibility in a town. If we wanted to buy a plow truck with it, if we wanted to buy fix a road with it, if you wanted to pay for a salary. So any of those things, what of the things that we've heard at ARPA, I would say don't fit into that category is the proposed grant program from EDC. That's not something we would typically do. That's not our typical governmental spending. So I would say that would fall into its own category within ARPA. So you just have a lot more flexibility, and the final rule made some changes so that states and municipalities could have a little bit more flexibility with how they spent those dollars.
Thanks, Erica.
You're welcome.
Is in general though, one of the things, this is kind of maybe something for Christina, but on a higher altitude level, this is rescue money. So it feels like it's to sort of repair some of the pain that's happened during COVID. And I guess what I'm wondering is it also looking at, does it feel like, is the committee considering that the needs of people in the pandemic are flattening out now, or it looks like it's sort of abating somewhat, or is this also to prepare for, is it repair versus, future need that's pandemic related is my question.
I think it's recover. So which can mean repair, but also prepare and also move on. So that's sort of how I see it. I don't know if you agree, Erica, but
I do. And, which is why, Stephanie, the positions that we're talking about, or the increases in human services, I think are really important in making sure that we have quality staff in place in a department to be able to provide to our most vulnerable citizens, not just those in need, but our senior citizens as well. We certainly saw in the early days of the pandemic that we knew they were the most affected by illness, and needing to make sure that there's help there for them. And that's where these dollars particularly come into play. But, there's I will tell you, there are some cities and towns that have turned the money away because they didn't want to deal with how to spend it. There are others that are struggling to spend it because the debate is, do we only use it to recover? And what does recover mean? Does recover mean maybe spend on some things during COVID that we weren't able to do, that got, kind of pushed to the side? Is it some things that have maybe been in the works you wanted to do for years and lessen a little burden moving forward? So I think that recovery piece looks different to every state and town.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a, chilling overlay that, that the auditor thinks that, perusal on audits will increase pretty sharply. So.
Sure. I mean, we look at what's happened just in, we can all kind of point to one particular city in Connecticut that seemed to be in the news most recently. And that's what I think people will look for to make sure these funds were used properly and for the right purposes, which is why I say when we look at the different categories, there's a category for those EDC grants, but it wouldn't, in my mind, it wouldn't be revenue loss when you look at it. So part of the whole process is just looking to see how you report how you spent the money. You spent the money and making sure the reporting matches the eligible use. And making sure that we don't spend it on things like paying down pensions or previous legal fees or previous debt. Those are all things we cannot use the dollars for. So the extra audits may be to ensure those things didn't happen as well. As well-intentioned as they might be, the rule is very clear on what we cannot use it for.
Mhm.
Okay, anything else on this, on the human services portion of the ARPA report?
I have a question.
Sure.
Is it as opposed to doing it over a 3-year process, stair stepping it down, is it possible to just approve it at a year-by-year basis and not forecast it over a 3-year span? So for instance, 75% coming from ARPA this year, 25% coming from the taxpayer, and we stop there, and then next year revisit it again and see what the actual needs of the town are.
I think structurally or process wise, that's kind of how it would have to happen. Well, it's how it would have to happen on our side, because we
Right.
would approve a budget year by year and send it to the taxpayers because they'll ultimately approve the budget. So
Correct.
for the Board of Finance's job, you're right, it will only be year by year. The ARPA Commission may be able to develop a plan over their entire time that they have money available to them. And I don't know that they need to go every year. I'm not sure of that.
So I would say, in my estimation, Jill, it's a good question. ARPA could approve the entire amount that has been requested. Because it is a salary and a budgetary item, it wouldn't be expended all at once. It would be expended over those multiple years. So if there were an issue next year, as we go through the budget process, I would say we would have to take another look at the ARPA process. Could we request more from ARPA if the budget couldn't handle it? Or could we make a change and not use some of the money that we had already encumbered from ARPA? So it would just be encumbered but not spent. And it's possible that if the outlook looked very different, that we could adjust the request we had made and potentially not spend it. So ARPA could tomorrow say, well, I won't say, I'll wait till after the public hearing. So we'll say after the 21st, ARPA could say, we approve the entire amount, but only the 75% for this year would be spent in 21 in the next fiscal year. The remainder would be spent in subsequent years. And so we could take another look at that each year, depending on how the budget process went. So I think it's always open for discussion. This isn't something we would spend in one fell swoop, like purchasing the radios for the fire
Right.
departments and public works. That would be an expense. It's going to go out, they're going to buy it and be done with it. This money would be there. And so I think there's opportunity even for ARPA or the requester to make an adjustment. We could ask for more or we could not spend it. And then it would go back into the available pot of money.
What is that total nut for this project? And I realize you can't put in the incremental growth with other pay raises.
I can tell you, we actually, because we did factor that in. So while I won't give you the percentage breakdown, I can tell you what we requested in total from ARPA, and it was $34,379. So in year one, it would be $16,098 from ARPA.
So didn't we talk about it as 15,000?
We did. So at ARPA, we did that. The calculation that I had originally made was incorrect. So we cleaned that up. The calculation I asked Anna to do was correct. What I was asking her to do was incorrect. What was in here didn't come out here. So we on Monday presented the correct number to ARPA with a breakdown of how that worked. So year one, apologize, I just put a year. It goes from 16,000. Year two is a little over 11,000, and year three is about 6,000. So it cycles down in total amount from ARPA, and then the opposite cost will be. So we took the increase in total and spread it out over 3 years.
Gotcha.
Okay, any other questions on this one? Okay. Christina, you had started talking about the ambulance, I believe.
Yeah, so there's a request to purchase a second ambulance. The request is for $100,000, and I see Alex is on the call. He can tell you the details. I'm looking for my sheet that has the detail of what it is, but I don't have it. But basically, it's the plan to purchase a second ambulance. So it would be essentially like a spare to have on hand if the current one needs maintenance work or is offline for whatever reason. And Alex can explain it better than me. So there he is.
And we have seen this before as well, so we're somewhat familiar with it, but Chief, feel free to give the latest details.
So the latest on it is, same as I had presented before, was this would be to run as a second or to swap off with our current truck. One, to try to save some life cycle, because we know at least 2 years, or what we're predicting right now is with purchasing a new truck is going to take us at least 2 years once it's ordered. So this will hopefully reduce the maintenance costs on the current truck and still allow us to respond to calls if the current truck has to go out for maintenance. The other hope is that this will help with some recruitment and retention stuff. We've actually had some interest in members that want to run it as a second ambulance to, at night if we have a second call, stuff like that. So, so we're hopeful that it'll actually be a recruitment thing as well.
Okay. Any questions for the chief while we've got him on here from board members?
And I just want to add the reason why, I recommended at least come to the Board of Finance to talk about it, is that it's really a new program, and in my mind, it's not something that we had before. And Erica has pointed out that, yeah, it's not like it would impact the operating budget in a significant way. There could be some maintenance costs on it. There could be fuel, equipment, that sort of stuff. That's not beyond what is already in the budget. So from that perspective, it doesn't, but just from the larger perspective of, we never had 2 ambulances before and now we would. That's what made me pause on giving it the okay out of the gate. So that's why we're here.
Board members, questions, discussion?
If we're talking about recovery money, does it make sense to consider the replacement of the first ambulance, which is imminent it's not in the first year of CIP, but it's coming. Is that like a more viable idea for ARPA because it's replacing something that already exists? It's not, all costs go up, but it's not going to be new costs other than increases.
You're saying recommend that ARPA up the request and order the new ambulance now.
Right. In order to, first of all, get that in the pipeline sooner if it's going to be a wait, and I don't know, I've heard varying timeframes on how long the wait might be, but I'm just wondering if that makes sense to sort of, even though we just paid, 5 figures to repair, it still might make sense to replace that ambulance. Because I was looking at Alex's text, on the second ambulance, a lot of, if we did that, a lot of these concerns would be moot for backup. And as it is, we have fresh repairs that are under warranty for a couple of years. But he points out flaws in the ambulance since it was in an accident, not our fault, in its infancy that we've been living with for a while. So I'm just thinking it could cure many ills, be good use of the ARPA money, and really alleviate the need for a full-fledged backup. Because the other concern I have is, when you're talking about recruiting, Alex, are you talking about volunteers to staff a second ambulance?
Yes, yeah, we've had some interest from some of our volunteers that, for a second call or something like that, of actually running it.
Would
Being
they
able to
be,
get out.
they'd have to be EMT trained and all that?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we do have volunteers that are EMTs and that are, interested in doing that. Community events, having it there rather than, staffed with volunteers, rather than having the paid staff tied at the event. There's other, the other main reason of this is, even if we buy a new truck, that truck's going to at some point have to go up for maintenance. We're going to be down without an ambulance. We're only one of 2 communities around us that only has 1 ambulance anymore. And that's because of, one, our call volume's getting higher, the bigger demand, and the unknowns. The unknowns of if you do have an accident or you have those large maintenance expenses or repairs, that the truck's out for any type of time. The idea of having to, and the liability of borrowing another community's ambulance, we have to get off of that.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was also really interested in your mutual aid numbers. I don't know if that's a share screen kind of thing, but the thing I thought was interesting about it is, even now with our 1 ambulance, we are by far we're aggressively helping out other communities at quite a different ratio than they're helping us. And I'm not saying it always comes down to this even 50-50 deal, but we already know about Union, where we've done 52 calls for them. They don't have an ambulance. 0 received back. But even like looking at Stafford, we have 84 calls that we've done for them, 39 that they've done for us, with a difference of 45. Altogether, those differences where Wellington has basically answered more mutual aid than the other partners is like over 100 calls. So it's like we've given 215 calls and we've received 86. So it just.
Can I make a couple comments on that real quick?
Well, yeah, but if
Okay,
I
sorry.
could just, I know you're gonna have some comment on it, but to me, it's one thing if over time, you know, things gyrate because someone has a horrific event that we go to, or a horrific year that we go and help them out with a lot of calls. It just doesn't, to me, it doesn't, those figures don't support that a second ambulance is some, you know, because you have a line in your explanation on your first page that says we can no longer function with the hope our mutual aid departments will cover us, and they're not really covering us. You know, but yet we're doing a lot of covering. So it feels like, is that a time to add an ambulance?
So
Because it feels
I
like
will,
we're already doing.
I will say a lot of the mutual aid, the Stafford stuff was when we had their truck. We went there a lot when we had their ambulance. There other of it is at nighttime because we have staffing in a lot, in some of the communities around us do not. You know, I don't have it in front of me, I apologize, but I think the Yukon number coming into Wellington far outweighs what we go to Yukon. And what we don't report on is that every time Yukon comes here is an automatic 2-person, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, is an automatic 2-person callback, which for
No,
them,
that stopped about 5 years ago. They don't do a callback for, I don't think
we were told recently that it,
Field or Willington. I don't believe they do callback anymore.
we were told recently that they do. Because they,
Okay, well, I haven't worked there in a couple of
Yeah,
years,
yeah.
so I could be
So-
wrong. Yep.
so when, you know, Yukon comes into us, they were paying people to come into the firehouse to cover them. We don't, you know, obviously we don't do that with our staffing unless it's some catastrophic event, but you know, mutual aid helps out each other. We do go a lot of places, but the way we also look at that is it brings revenue in. The more calls that we're doing brings more revenue into Fund 17.
Right, I understand that, but you know, we have to like remind people that the taxpayer amount of that is a 3/4 share. The revenue pays for like a quarter of it that's returned. So it's still like, yes, but those calls are actually more expensive to the town taxpayers. I'm not saying the revenue isn't a blessed event. It's just, it's not covering the cost of those extra calls. So I just think that needs to be pointed out. Yukon's the only one that we're beholden to. And the one thing that's different about Yukon and the others, which are towns, is that the other towns are self-supporting their, except for Union, their ambulance service. And Yukon is a state entity that we're all state taxpayers and finance what's going on at Yukon. So in some ways, we're taxpayers at Yukon too. And I think Yukon also has a real expansive approach, which is take care of the neighbors. I mean, not exclusively, but I think they're very giving that way. And much of their program, and we're lucky to be one of the towns that's nearby. So it was just kind of arresting given some of what we're looking at here. I just think it'd be better to replace the first ambulance. You know, and alleviate some of the other concerns.
So, Chief, a lot of the discussion about the second ambulance has been, originally was about the reliability problem of your current ambulance. And it has, as we've spent more time talking about it, we've talked about some other areas that have kind of been added in. And you added another area tonight by saying about sort of adding the volunteer interest in staffing.
And that's actually new to us too, because until we actually started talking about it as a department is when we started seeing the interest of it.
All right, so So the ambulance, as we've been talking about a lot the last couple of budget years and a lot this year, the ambulance is absolutely a critical service, but it's an expensive service. And having multiple rigs is added expense. The great thing is with having ARPA money is we can augment some of this with sort of off budget dollars. But is there, I guess, what's your reaction or your interest in if we were to sort of recommend to ARPA that they help move forward with getting you to ordering the new ambulance right away? Instead of having 2 ambulances that the taxpayers maintain, let's get to ordering your new one.
I'd still say that we need to have 2 ambulances. At the end of the day, and regardless, we could have the new ambulance for 2 weeks and it gets crashed. We're back in the same scenario that we are right now, where we're having continued maintenance expenses or long duration being out of service.
Right.
We're at a point where we can continue functioning as we are. We're not providing the best service that we can. When we're out of service and not having an ambulance, it doubles the response time to get to somebody's house if we're not there.
Do you have an idea? Tolland runs 2 ambulances, Stafford runs 2 ambulances. You were saying we're one of the communities left that only runs 1 ambulance,
Us
right?
and Ashford.
Yeah. So
Around us is us and Ashford does half the call volume that we do.
and but Ashford, right, okay, yep, Ashford, and they have 1 rig.
They have 1 ambulance.
Rig. Tolland, do you have any idea how many calls they do?
Around 2,000, and they're looking at buying a third. Was the last
Okay.
that I had gotten from Chief Lightout.
Okay, so
Stafford
they're
does
doing,
15.
go ahead.
Stafford does 1,500 calls with 3 ambulances.
Okay. But they're not typically running 3 ambulances because you go to Stafford a lot to cover.
Correct. It all depends on time of day. Honestly, it
Right.
depends on time of day and volunteers, because anything after the first ambulance is volunteers
Right. And Tolland is only staffing during the daytime. So
during the
it's
day.
questionable what they're going to get for staffing.
Correct.
So Tolland at 2.5 times the calls you run is running 2 ambulances. Stafford at twice the amount of calls you're running is running 2 ambulances.
Yep, 2 to 3.
Yeah. Okay.
Summers who runs just, I think they're at 1,400 calls, 1,300 calls for transports, is running 3 ambulances.
Okay.
Um,
All right. Any other questions for the chief, Pete?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I generally agree with Chief Moore on this. I see the direction he's going as valuable, mostly because a new ambulance would take 2 years for it to arrive, and we're looking to up that service now. The only concern I have is the mission creep that's already started here with the using it as retention, sending a second ambulance. I don't want to see that grow into a second ambulance payroll. You know, the mission creep is starting to concern me. That's the only thing I had.
and that is absolutely we have absolutely no intention of doing that. This honestly is to make sure that we can continue to provide the services that we are today.
Yeah, I understand that, Chief, and I fully believe every word you say on that. Believe me, it's just that once we start mission creep, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, I don't want to see this blowing up. That's all. There's a lot of unintended consequences. That's all.
The other thing I would point out is that, we're not comparable to the towns around us, except for Ashford, really. When we look at the mutual aid, all these towns are 2 or 3 times bigger than us. And it makes it kind of like, for instance, Tolland, we've answered 51 calls for them. They've come to 7 Willington calls. It just, and frankly, they're a wealthier town. It's more sizable and wealthier. And yet we say we can't count on the other towns to really be there for us for mutual aid.
Real quick, just on that, Tolland comes to us less it's by design. Of where the boundaries are for our mutual aid. Yukon covers more than half of our town is a mutual aid department because they have paid staff there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Tolland, we don't do that. Tolland has a smaller portion. Tolland covers the I-84 corridor. They split 2 or 3 sections with Stafford. That's by design to have UConn coming in farther. And they cover a smaller percentage, a much smaller percentage. That's why the numbers, them coming into town is less than what it is for UConn.
Mhm.
We honestly pull UConn for much more of the town than we do anybody else. And I agree with you, Tolland is a much wealthier town. Tolland also runs 7 full-time guys during the day.
They should move 2 to nighttime.
What's that?
They should move 2 to nighttime to
No
help you.
comment. No comment.
All right.
Well, that
but-
is the question. I mean, we're a town and
All right.
we, in the last census, we went down from, 6,000 to 5,500. We're a small town compared to these towns. And I
I
guess,
agree with you with the same liabilities though.
and yet, yes, the same liabilities, but
But
we're
not the
doing
same revenue
24/7 staffing, right?
I agree
And
with you.
they aren't. So, it's just,
All right.
I
right,
I appreciate this sort of idea of you guys are regional, you guys are, kind of looking at your private mission. I'm just thinking about it in terms of the Wellington taxpayer.
Okay, we are an hour into the meeting and we're still on item 1. So if there's any more board discussion, any more feedback we want to give to Christina to send back to ARPA, let's do that now. Christina, any thoughts, or were you about to say something?
No, just that, just the next step is the public hearing that's happening on the 21st. So I guess we have one more meeting between now and then. If the Board of Finance wanted to provide some formal guidance or just, I don't think it has to be a motion or anything, but it doesn't need to be really anything. So it can be whatever, but I think it would be helpful.
I had a lot of concerns originally about the human services salary situation, but as we talked about it tonight, I have a little bit different perspective on it because of the fact that it was essentially originally submitted to us. And this is an attempt to dull the effect of that. At first, I thought it just didn't seem in my mind to meet the idea of ARPA because it was essentially creating new salary that we would then have to put the taxpayers on the hook for. I guess my opinion is changing on that a little bit because basically that new salary was already asked for. The only thing that makes it difficult is that it's 2 different approval paths, because the ARPA approval path is different from our approval path. And so when we go through budget discussion and we do allocations next week or the week after, whenever we do it, we're only approving the quarter. But we're sort of implying, well, I guess we'd approve each year. So if we choose not to approve it, if the board chooses for some reason next year not to approve enough to cover that salary, then that becomes that department's problem. They would have to find the money in other places. So as I think through it, it's not quite as much of a structural problem as I thought it was before. So that's my thought on it. Pete?
Yeah, I have something much shorter and easier to answer. That meeting's at 6:30 or 7.
6:30.
Thank you.
All right, any other board discussion before we wrap this topic?
No, the only thing I'm concerned is about the advisory we already sent. Did sort of specify that, please be conscious of expanding expense in subsequent years that fall to the taxpayer. And even if it does sort of help the rolling in of the human services pay policies or pay movement there, it's not without that impact. So that's the only thing. It's a little bit at odds with what we sent last week.
Well, the only choice we have is to send guidance or recommendations. We've done that. We've done our role.
Mhm.
Mhm.
All right, thank you, Christina, for having the most complicated representation to another committee report.
Thanks.
Okay, we're moving on to new business budget discussion. I'll take, if anyone has a particular path members want to take with this. Do you want me to put up the summary of what each department is with their request and the percent change, and we can go line by line and see if we have any questions? It wouldn't be line items within the departments, it would be departments overall, because unless you want to look at, I'll have to pull up the line items for the individual. Christina?
Is it possible to just kind of just do a top line of what the overall increase is and what the potential impact that could be, just so we can look at it from a lens of how big of a nut we're talking about here?
So that's a question for Donna. Have your magic spreadsheet geared up?
Yes, I have my appropriation worksheet prepared for discussion.
Right. Would you like to
So,
do a screen share and get us up there?
sure. Okay, can you double check that I have capability to screen share?
Well, I thought I had, yeah, it's checked.
Okay. Okay, all right. Yep, I see it.
All right, there we go.
Okay, so the total expenditures of the three budgets, Region 19, K through 8, and general government, is $19,169,000. So if you apply fund balance of $355,000, you are looking at a mill rate increase of 1.91 mils
Okay.
to support that level of spending.
Okay.
What is that with the, with fund balance applied? What is the fund balance amount?
The dollar amount is $355,000. So I picked that number because the preliminary forecast of fund balance, if you choose to apply 350,000, it puts you at 11% of your budgetary expenditure appropriation.
So would be 11% of that 19,169,122, right?
Yes,
Yep.
correct.
All right. And then what was your starting fund balance number before taking the 355 out of it?
Okay, my forecast of unassigned
Sure.
fund balance, okay, is $2,472,000.
Okay. I will note for my notes, that's forecasted. I'll emphasize.
Yes, yes, it's
Okay.
it'll change next month
Mm-hmm.
To the good?
to the good. So that's based on the assumption that all of the budgeted expenditures are spent.
Right. So the 2,472 even minus the 355,000 would then give us the remaining, which is the 11%.
Yes, gives you
Gotcha.
the remaining unassigned, which comes out to 11%.
Okay. And also that is with the 31.9 mill rate, which would be approximately $191 increase per 100,000.
Yes, yes, that is correct.
So for assessed value of a house, every 100,000, it's $191 increase.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for letting me say those out loud, so I made sure I understood them right.
Mike, can I ask Donna?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I'm not
Oh, no, it's okay.
writing notes, I wasn't looking at the screen.
So Donna, on a $300,000 house, it would be close to $600 more a year?
Yes,
That's okay. I thought it was for 200,000, so, okay, thank you.
We had done a thing that was probably confusing from the last couple of years, Christina. We were using a $200,000 assessed house as a sample.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to make sure.
We were just saying, so if someone's house is assessed at 200, it means this much. In this case, it means
Double that.
it means $382
Mhm. Okay,
on a $200,000 house.
And that's 200 assessed value.
Yes, not appraised, not current market.
So it's really more than, for our viewing public, more than a $200,000 house. It's like a $260,000 house
Well, yes.
in
right.
market value. Yeah.
In market value, correct, yes.
I just don't think people think of their house in terms of assessed value.
You don't normally think of it that way. That's correct.
Hopefully it'll get more than 70% of its real value.
Yes, right. Okay, so right now, just as it sits, we know what we're dealing with. And as we know, our couple of options are to increase the amount from the fund balance, which would reduce the amount required by taxation. Bringing our fund balance down, in lower percentages. Our other option is cutting expenses. And what we usually seem to end up doing is a mix of the two.
Could we just review the fund balance sort of sweet number for us as a town, and also what's kind of recommended is 8 to 12, is that right? 8 to
Yeah.
12% over value of the budget.
Yes, 8 to 12% of the expense budget.
Mhm.
So that number can be affected a couple of different ways. It can be affected by how much of the fund balance you take out to apply to the budget. It also can be funded by cutting expenses, because then you're gauging your percentage against a larger expense budget. I mean, smaller expense budget.
And just to recap, and I've done this for you guys the last couple of years for the Board of Finance, the 10-year look back on mill levy increases. But in a nutshell, it's been pretty static since 2017. We haven't had a tax increase for 5 years. And we actually reduced it by 1/10 of a point last year, or this year, I mean. So we were at 30.09 mill levy for 4 years. And then in 2021, we reduced that to 29.99. So it was a tiny decrease, but yet it was indeed a decrease, and it's been flat really for this budget year would be this, the 6th year after that.
Okay. So what direction would you guys like to take? Should we start looking at some individual lines and ask some questions? Does someone have a particular line that they've been looking at that they want to ask questions about?
Can I ask a question before you start? The only line that doesn't, like you all didn't discuss or present, is your budget. We've Donna's kind of filled that in.
Yep.
Will you all address that before you start looking at the budget as a whole? I mean,
Yeah,
it's a relatively small budget, but if you
Yeah.
were, you all discussed contingencies or whether or not you thought you needed to put placeholders, I think it would
right.
probably worth a discussion.
Yeah, I mean, for the purpose of, yeah, well, it's about like 6 lines down in the list here, so we'll come right to that pretty quickly, hopefully. Christina?
And this isn't a question about a specific line, it's just about the salaries overall. If we don't know the number yet,
Oh, that's a good question.
the ratified number.
No. You don't know the exact, what makes up the placeholder we use. That is correct. And I
Okay.
take a deep breath because every day it's a communication with our attorney to see if they've heard from the union. And I can tell you, we won't hear anything this week and into next week. The union representative is out of the country.
Oh,
So
okay.
we are on a pause that a very impatient pause.
Yeah, it's I know I'm preaching to the choir, as the saying goes, but this is it's difficult for us to attempt to approve a budget with a
Yes.
placeholder number in it, particularly. I completely understand why you put a larger, a placeholder that doesn't seem like it hints to the exact amount. I completely understand why you did that, and I understand why you can't talk about what the amount is. But it is difficult for us to get to the point, we really would be good if we had a number before we do
Yeah.
final.
That number is made up of what we have discussed in negotiations. And so it's a solid number. It's not, we're just waiting to formalize it. So that's the even more difficult part, is that I don't see it changing. That's not what I think is holding up the process. We have discussed on and agreed upon some items, and that being one of them. So, look, Mike, we asked a year ago to start this process, and here we are. I wish I could be very clear with you, because it would have been ratified on both ends, but I'm trying my best to hold to the negotiation process.
Okay.
But that placeholder is made up of real numbers that we anticipate being ratified. If I can
Okay.
tell you that.
Okay.
Okay, so the 5% is real,
It's a real placeholder.
real-ish.
Yes.
So and the
Oh.
5%, is that like if in the library budget and in the
We don't negotiate the library.
but don't they, like, I know Donna usually takes, maybe not for the library, but for some of the other budgets.
Every salary line item within the selectmen's budget. And then I think a couple others typically. And so, yes, Donna made adjustments. So what you saw in their presentation, I think most of them brought to you with 0 because they didn't know the number. Donna has made adjustments.
Okay. Okay, so and those are in what we're looking at right now.
Yes, yes.
All right. And I mean, just my observation is there's a lot of salary adjusting going on. There's from the bottom wages that are being brought up to minimum wage that were below. There's adjusting happening there. And then the union wage increase, and then pretty much it seems like every department head is getting an even bigger increase than that. If it just feels that way, looking at all these budgets and including some of the other places. So it feels like a lot of the increase is in salaries, and this just could be a year where the adjusting is happening. But I would want to know what's going to go on next year, because if this is the year where it's getting adjusted, then next year we wouldn't expect to see the same.
And I would agree with that, because we remember that the current year we're in could be affected by the negotiation, right? We ideally would have had a new plan, a new CBA in place on July 1. And so you're not seeing a placeholder may be covering more than one fiscal year, and we're only seeing it in one because it didn't happen prior to the budget. And so, yes, it does look a little bit more off. So I would say next year it would look a little bit more in balance.
Okay.
Well, I
It's
will
really
say,
hard to
I
talk in such
appreciate,
vague.
I appreciate you attempting to give us something to work with,
It's-
to tell us things without telling us things.
Yeah. Look, Mike, you and I, we both spend a lot of time talking about trying to be transparent, and I feel as though I'm doing the exact opposite of that. It's a fine line to ride because of a negotiation process.
Yeah, you have a requirement, you have a legal requirement you have to
Yes.
follow. I understand that.
And I think we just don't want to make an assumption and just overpay, overpay what we need to. Rather underpay than we need to and make the decisions that way. But if we're in a ballpark, if we're in the right ballpark, then we're in the right ballpark. So. Okay.
Are we in the fiscal year when the state is having everyone stair step 2 notches on the minimum wage, or is it next fiscal year? Is
The
it
budget
fiscal-
that we are working on right now is for that year. So after this, July 1 is the budget year that has the 2 steps. You have like a July 1 and then a June 30th.
Right,
It comes at the end of this year,
right,
this coming year.
okay. And that's all factored in, right? Those 2 steps in the process. in the
Yeah,
budget?
I think Erica said before that they don't really have much for staff at the minimum wage that we're being.
Oh, that's right.
Uh,
She
It
did.
So-
affects like Parks and Rec and their temporary staff. That's really where it hits. I think the library had some folks at one point at minimum wage, so it might affect them. But I know, they've tried to account for that, and it's in those temporary wages.
Okay, so I guess one, because I don't have the line items in front of me, I'm doing it by memory, but I feel like when we were looking, I know we've talked about a little, we were looking at the collector, the revenue collector, and the last number I remember seeing was that it was essentially a 23% raise. And I believe that's a combination of a raise and maybe change in the amount of hours. I'm not sure. It drew my attention because it's 23%. And, obviously that's a significant number. I don't know if anyone else has any wisdom, any thoughts?
Are we gonna screen share or?
I can screen share.
Mike?
Yes,
Yeah, I'm not sure I have any wisdom, but I have thoughts.
please.
That seems like a huge pay increase, and I think that if we spread it over a couple years, it might be a better, a less horrific bump for our budget.
Which one is that, Mike?
Revenue collector. I'm trying to shuffle through my papers here. I should have been better prepared since I asked the question. Donna, were you bringing up the budget? Or do you want me to?
I think that I have it. I'm just not sure if you are seeing it.
Yep, it just popped up.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so line 58 on here.
Yeah.
So 22.8%. So Erica, is that just a raise in rate, or is it rate and hours?
This is already a 35-hour-a-week full-time position.
Okay,
So it is an increase. I will tell you currently, our certified revenue collector makes less than the assistant revenue collector who's not certified. One is union, one is not. I'll tell you that compared to like towns, if we break these salaries down into hourly rates, Eastford's tax collector makes $38.94 an hour, Hebron at $37.50, Marlboro $34.73. And our tax collector currently at 35 hours a week would be 23.33.
Just
And so
significantly
this would bring
below
that
those
up to
comparative.
$28 an hour.
Okay. So, I mean, based on the reasoning, it seems very reasonable. It's just a 23% raise in 1 year is a big gulp.
I don't disagree, Mike. I think retention in staff is important. We've known for some time that some of our salaries were well under funded. And simply, the only reason I didn't attempt breaking this request out over ARPA is because I thought it, the human services was right for ARPA and the absolute right use for those funds. Certainly if I hear Peter saying break it up over a couple of years, I think you just had a discussion about how you can't guarantee any of that. So, to say that is, you certainly couldn't guarantee it, but I just, when I give you those numbers and in comparison to some of our surrounding towns, it's significant. By July 1st, our assistant tax collector will be making $24.39 an hour, and our tax collector would be at $23.33, so more than $1 less per hour.
Mm-hmm. Although she does get the benefit of having a full-time job and benefits, whereas the assistant does not. The assistant is only how many hours a week?
In 18 hours.
18 hours a week. Okay. Okay. Anybody else on the board? A question on this or other topics?
Well, just to note that our collection rate is pretty damn astounding.
I will tell you, and I'm being very sarcastic, when yesterday our collector shared with me that our tax collection rate currently this year, without prior year, without advanced collections, without fees, without interest, is 99.72. And I think I said to her, it's like you're not even trying to get to 100. So you can see by the report Donna had shared with you earlier, we're well over with when you add in fees, interests, advanced collections and prior year collections. So listen, it has nothing to do, she works hard, but that's not the reason I bring this to you. The reason I bring this to you is because we've talked about this, and the Board of Selectmen have been aware that we had a salary that was not in line for a while, and I'm not sure how much longer we can hold off making it right. It is a big hit, but the last couple of years as we were in COVID was a real struggle to get to see an increase with the uncertainty last year. So
can you put this in context? Are we doing that for several people? I mean, I know that the assessor is a big growth in salary for,
correct.
reasons that we're.
I would say no. This kind of jump, really, we're looking at human services and the revenue collector. The assessor, while yes, there's a need for more hours. So there's more hours that's going with that position, as opposed to this one. It's not a change in hours. This one is already full-time at 35 hours a week.
So Erica, I just want to go back on a point you made a moment ago. I think one of the things you said, we don't make salary adjustments based on performance or bonus. That's important for us to be clear on. It's wonderful that we have a good collector, and of course for retention we want to treat the collector properly, but we make our decisions on the job classification and the expectations of it. So I am glad you brought that up, because we want to make sure we don't confuse those issues.
That's right. Yeah, it's nice to say that we can back that up, Mike, but you are absolutely right. And when I give you the figures from the other towns, you can see that they are just we are well out of whack.
Yeah.
And I didn't even give you the Mansfield number.
Yeah.
We do have
Joe,
a similar increase to the town clerk position at 22.1%.
Erica, you're muted.
It's not a meeting. I can't say that to somebody, right? That line item was trued up. So the year prior, we had a change in staff between my office and the town clerk, and their salaries in the two offices never really changed. And Donna would have to speak to why that was, but we trued that up so that the salary had gone down in the selectman's office and up in the town clerk's office. And now we put them back in balance. So
So
within
that,
the department, it does look like a big increase, but that same person was being paid there last year. It just was. And you can see in the final number in the town clerk salary in the third column, where it was originally budgeted 44,000 and 52,545 was what was spent. That was all of the current tax collector salary. And this year it will be similar. We just trued up that line.
so the raise in the budget line is not a raise to the person, it's a raise to the budget to pay, to refill what was supposed to be in there.
That is correct. So I will tell you that if that had been done last year, the number you would see here would be in line with what you're seeing in every other department. It would look like somewhere around a 5% number.
Okay.
So the increase proposed in salary for this position is no different than a standard annual increase.
Okay. All right. More questions? Board members, anything else that we want to keep in mind? Tonight is the night we want to try to resolve anything that we're unsure of, because we could potentially do allocations next week. We don't have to, but our current calendar allows us to, it says that would be the meeting. So the agenda could be to do allocations. If everyone has seen enough to start making decisions, we can do that. So I just want to make sure that if board members have things they want to ask about, we get that stuff either out tonight, or you get questions to me like tonight by email so I can get them to people. Otherwise, there isn't time for people to answer them. I'm not seeing, I don't have much.
Mike, hang on
Yes.
just a minute. I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself there for a second. The only
You
two
should yell
lines,
louder.
thanks. The only two lines that I was looking at were the senior center operations, which is going up almost 20%, and public works, which is going up over almost 11%. And I just don't remember why those are going up that much.
Public Works was partly, if I remember right, a part-time position moving to a full-time. There was also significant, no, that's not true.
No, there's just a slight classification. I think that salary would wash out with what we paid them in overtime for that classification jump. A lot of the increases, our fuel increases are in there, and there were lots of maintenance increase costs. We added
Yep, tree
$50,000
removal.
for tree removal.
Yep.
And several of the maintenance items, and salt as well. Troy can talk to you about what oil costs even earlier this year compared
Right.
to what it costs currently is significant. In the senior center, there are two biggest increases. So while I know you look at 18%, I think, we're talking about $6,000, and what that $6,000 makes up is more important than the 18% number. In their maintenance category, they've asked for funding for restriping and paving the small portion of that lot that belongs to the senior center, is in need of that maintenance. And then because of the cost of heat, and when I came to you and Phil and I came to you and said we had locked in at a horrible number of 294 and 297, it's a whole lot better than it would have been this week. So suddenly it's looking
Yeah,
pretty
it
good.
looks like about half of it is the oil and about half of it is the parking lot.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. That answers my questions.
You're welcome.
Erica, I just want to go back to something in Public Works.
Yes.
The fuel for the fire departments, for the trucks, the ambulance and all that, come through the Public Works budget. Does that get refilled by the departments, or is that just something that is carried in the Public Works budget?
So I'm going to defer to Donna, but I'm pretty sure it's just carried through the Public Works Department.
That's correct.
I don't understand why, but they become responsible for fire department fuels. It just,
Yeah, so I mean.
if we shift it, then theirs is gonna go up and you're gonna wonder why they have a big increase. So,
Right,
I mean, it
right.
stays here, but it
No,
does
I'm
affect yours
I'm just
somewhere.
pointing it out that,
It's
that
strange.
there is, if you look in there, you can see that there are, like, for example, diesel for, line 190. Diesel for Wellington Fire Department number 1 went up $4,428 because presumably fuel prices, right? And so that's, so Public Works is taking a hit on that too. So it's just sort of a, I'm just pointing that out, that
Yeah, good point.
bring
Mike.
some expense for other.
16,000, almost 17,000 of the Public Works dollars. It's minimal compared to the entire budget is
Sure.
fuel for the two, between gas and diesel for the two departments. Not the increase, but the overall cost.
Right. Yes. And thinking back to the history on that, the fire departments used to purchase their fuel from the local gas stations. We had an account at the old Bates Texaco and Red Narts. And eventually the town worked out this arrangement because the fuel, the town had purchasing power through Public Works. And why it's carried in that budget, I don't remember, but that's how it ended up happening, so.
That's
And
one
I
of
don't
the
think
things
that's
always
like a
been.
temporary blip either from what I'm reading about the fuel increase. I think it's more of a long, not awaited, because who wants it to increase? But, you know, a long time coming, you know, sort of resetting of the reality of oil.
Yeah, I mean, the day this conflict began, Phil and Donna and I gathered and discussed and immediately locked in. Had we even waited a day, I mean, the increase would have been more significant. So we were willing to wait it out, but conflicts like this make you stop in your tracks.
Yeah, Tuesday, diesel, down the street from me, diesel went up $1 just Tuesday at the pump. Yep, a whole $1.
Yeah, but between Thursday, when I got personal heating oil, and Monday, between Thursday and Monday, it went up just over $1 a gallon. So it's not pretty. So suddenly 297 looks pretty good.
Right. Okay, so, Donna, the
Did that
current
answer
fiscal
all of
year-
Peter's Public Works questions, Mike? I just want to make sure.
I think
before
we did, right, Peter? Because he muted,
Correct.
Okay.
he
I just
muted
wanted
and
to
shut
make
off
sure
his
before I
camera,
put
so I
this
took
packet
this-
away.
yeah, he shut off his camera and muted. I took that as a signal. Donna, for the Board of Finance budget, Department 131, we have something like in the current fiscal year, $5,018 or some odd number like that.
Yes, that's correct.
Aha, all right. Of that, I think we had a small amount for legal counsel, something like $500. Here we go.
So remind me what your request is.
Oh, okay. We had,
Because I left.
we had added
just flat.
$1,000 in miscellaneous previous.
Okay, okay,
So if you see, that was what we added last year in case we needed to use it for some legal counsel.
okay.
And so I guess I'd look to some guidance from the other board members if we want to leave our budget right where it is. I don't think we would have anything that is expected to change. We already carry money in there for paying the secretary, recording secretary. What do you think, board members? All right.
Is there
Let's-
anything, is there anything that we would have to worry about in terms of the new big player coming in town and pushing back against the town on tax issues or anything else?
I don't think that would be in our,
In our purview? Okay,
no.
all right. Well, the only other thing is the whole ARPA thing and, you know, if legal is required for what happens in auditing and everything else, you know, I mean, I don't know, as far as retaining it goes.
Can I say stuff? I believe then that would be on the town legal budget.
Okay,
Why don't we why don't we do a placeholder? Let's keep it the same as it is in the current fiscal year for now. All
Okay,
right,
thank you, Mike.
thank you, Donna. Okay. Anything else from the board for any of these budgets? Any questions we want to ask? Or is everybody done? All right, does that, let me find my, oh, on this side. Okay, does that conclude budget discussion? All right, then we are moving on to correspondence. You guys have everything? So we're back to present to speak. So anyone who's on here who would like to speak, turn on your camera, wave your hand, or raise the little yellow hand, or unmute and call out your name. Phil Stevens, go ahead.
Mike, I just wanted to add that the Board of Education did reapprove their budget with the package that's in front of you. So it did go through their vote, and what you have in front of you was approved.
Thank you. Alex Moore.
I just wanted to mention the ambulance repairs have been completed. And it did come under budget. We have not gotten the final bill. We will need to do a budget increase on our budget at some point for that as discussed. But we're not sure. We believe it's going to be much less than what we had anticipated.
All right, thank you for the positive news right there.
I have to give positive sometime.
Yeah, Chief Moore. Are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Do you happen
Joe,
to have?
just point of order, Joe. We're not supposed to engage in discussion during present to speak.
Oh, I do apologize. I do apologize.
If you have a question, though, you can feel free to email it after the meeting and I'll send.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Anybody else for present to speak? Okay. For good and welfare, again, welcoming Samantha. And also with the lifting of restrictions, we should expect perhaps in our next regular meeting to start talking about if we're going to move towards anything in person or back to hybrid like we were doing before or something to that effect. So have your thoughts ready on that stuff. Anyone else, anything for good and welfare? All right, Pete Tanaka, you're up.
Move to adjourn.
Can I get a second?
second,
All those in favor, please say aye and wave your hand.
Aye.
It's looking like the vote carried. Thanks, everybody.
bye.